Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis once again for conservatives. Back on our normal format, at least for one day. Let's start with the good, Jim, and we go to NBC News. After 2 years and 200 interviews, the Senate Intelligence Committee is approaching the end of its investigation into the 2016 election, having uncovered no direct evidence of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, according to both Democrats and Republicans on the committee. But investigators disagree along party lines when it comes to the implications of a pattern of contacts they have documented between Trump associates and Russians, contacts that occurred before, during, and after Russian intelligence operatives were seeking to help Donald Trump by leaking hacked Democratic emails and attacking his opponent, Hillary Clinton, on social media. Senator Richard Burr, the chairman of the committee, quote, "If we write a report based upon the facts that we have, then we don't have anything that would suggest there was collusion by the Trump campaign and Russia." The Democrats obviously going to quibble with some of the details there, Jim, but it's kind of a low bar to clear. But our president was not officially colluding with the Russians in 2016, at least according to this a report from the Senate Intelligence Committee, in which we should point out that the members really much saw this investigation in the same way and pretty much were in agreement with how it was conducted.
Yeah, you know, this is where you all of a sudden you can see every Democrat leaping out of their chair saying, well, okay, not officially, but unofficially. A couple other interesting details in that article, Greg. One of them is that Democratic Senate investigators say it may take them 6 or 7 months to write their final report once they are done with witness interviews. Now, as you pointed out, we're now in the 2-year category. How many folks are left, guys? I kind of left one, what have you been doing all this time? And then the idea that it could take them 6 or 7 months to write a final report. Look, I'm just saying Cam Edwards and I wrote a book in 6 months from concept to execution, faster than that. So I don't, the other thing, you look at this and you're saying, okay, so the minimum they're getting this out 7 months from now, in all likelihood, 8 months from now. That would be the end of this year. By the way, Democratic primary would be heating up or stuff like that. You kind of have left wondering how much is there an aim to get this released during 2020 to try to throw this into the 2020 campaign as a stink bomb or something like that. At some point, the American public is going to say, we're not that worried about what happened in the 2016 presidential election because we are right in the meat of the 2020 presidential election. So you kind of wonder, if one, I'm not surprised. At one point in that article, they say, well, look, we didn't find it written in blood. Well, gee, that doesn't sound like Trump's style, right? Never mind the P tape. He seems like a very big germaphobe. He would not be signing contracts. Secondly, if you have a contract signed in blood saying, hey, Vlad, we're going to collude. Look, did no one learn anything from Trump's history as a real estate in New York City? If he's going to leave Trump contractors holding the bill left and right, why would the FSB go ahead and sign that contract with them? And look, I understand this is comic hyperbole on their part, but people will kind of fairly act because when they say, well, yes, we do have evidence when he said he's willing to accept help from the Russians and he publicly urged the Russians to find Clinton's missing emails, that reference to, hey, if they're hacking that stuff, maybe they can hack this stuff. The NBC News article says with kind of this almost comic understatement, those facts are beyond dispute, but they also have been known for some time and have not seemed to change Trump's political standing. You're kind of left wondering just what's going to be in this report that we don't know already, and how much is it really going to affect the thinking of the American people, particularly when it seems like it's going to be coming out in late 2019, early 2020, telling us what we should have known about the 2016 election.
Jim, I can say with quite a bit of confidence that I think people's opinions already are going to color what they think of the report. The report is not going to color what their opinions are. People have decided what they think of Trump.
Yeah, I remember seeing this argument from a few Republicans in 2012 that they wanted to make the argument that Obama was inexperienced and not ready for the job. And I was saying, like, he's been on the job for 4 years. Whether or not you think he's got sufficient lifetime experience and whether he was adequately prepared when he went in, people know what they think of this guy by now. And you got to make your argument about what he's done and what he hasn't done, not about what they should have known back, 4 years ago. And I wonder if Democrats will be on the verge of making the same mistake of, hey, here's a bunch of stuff you should have known back in 2016. They're either going to say 4 more years of this or no, I'm ready for a change. And that's what the fulcrum of 2020 is going to be.
And I don't want to leave the cliffhanger out there. For anyone wondering, the book that Jim Geraghty and Cam Edwards got from start to finish in 6 months, Heavy Lifting, Grow Up, Get a Job, Raise a Family, and Other Manly Advice, now available at Amazon and other fine places.
Thank you for blurbing it and pitching it, Greg, so that I don't have to. By the way, if for anyone who did read it and said, wow, this is really good, but I felt like there was going to be more. Well, now you know. We had 6 months to work on it.
All right, let's move to our bad martini now, Jim. And you could certainly have worse martinis, but this is not good for conservative and Republican fortunes in the U.S. Senate. Last year, we spent quite a bit of time, especially as we got close to Election Day, talking about the Arizona Senate race to replace Jeff Flake between Kyrsten Sinema and Martha McSally. Ultimately, Kyrsten Sinema wins, but because there was a vacant Senate seat following the death of John McCain and John Kyle deciding not to continue to be the interim senator for another 2 years, Martha McSally got a Senate seat anyway. But that also means she has to run for re-election again in 2020, and if she wins, then again in 2022. So Martha McSally could be on the ballot a lot, but now we know she's going to have a pretty stiff challenge, most likely, in 2020. And that is because former astronaut Mark Kelly, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, who most folks will remember as the former Democratic congresswoman who was tragically shot in the head during that town hall back in 2011. He is running for Senate, and here's a little bit of his campaign launch video.
You know, I learned a lot from being an astronaut. I learned a lot from being a pilot in the Navy. I learned a lot about solving problems from being an engineer. But what I learned from my wife is how you use policy to improve people's lives. Arizonans are facing incredibly challenging issues here in the years to come. Access to affordable health care, the stagnation of wages, job growth, the economy. As the climate warms, we're going to have more drought here in the desert. Partisanship and polarization and gerrymandering and corporate money have ruined our politics, and it's divided us. I care about people. I care about the state of Arizona. I care about this nation. So because of that, I've decided that I'm launching a campaign for the United States Senate.
So there you go, Jim. Mark Kelly is running for Senate against Martha McSally. We should point out Martha McSally couldn't beat the person who called Arizona the meth lab of democracy, and now she's running against an astronaut, a Navy pilot, and, of course, the husband of a woman who has great affection in the state of Arizona.
Yeah, Greg, I just called over to the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and I just got the recording of Bill Paxton in Aliens. Game over, man. Game over. They won't like that characterization, but this is exactly the kind of candidate Democrats would love to run and exactly the kind of candidate Republicans would rather not go up against. It's not to say this is a done deal. Obviously, there's at least one Democratic congressman out there thinking about running for office for the Senate office as well. Ideally, if you're a Republican, you're hoping for a messy primary fight. We do remember that he did make that tweet in which he apologized for quoting Winston Churchill, which kind of was this weird, cringe-inducing moment of a guy who shouldn't be apologizing for anything, apologizing for something that is, that's not a sin, that's a virtue to be quoting Winston Churchill. So we'll see what Kelly's like on the campaign trail. What happens when he has to stop being Mr. Bipartisan, beloved astronaut, and to start taking positions. He could be a little more vulnerable there than you think. But look, if you have any doubts about the power of astronauts running for office, not just John Glenn, I remind you, Greg, Bill Nelson was a senator in Florida for 3 terms, and half of Florida couldn't remember who he was. Astonishingly low name ID. And I remember Florida Republicans said, I was like, how does this guy keep winning? And the Florida Republican told me, look, once every 6 years, he pops out and he says, hi, I'm Bill Nelson. I used to be an astronaut. Aren't astronauts cool? Vote for me in November. And he wins. And that's a slight exaggeration, but Bill Nelson leaned heavily on, and he accumulated this reputation as a centrist while not really defying his party all that often. Now, look, Rick Scott beat him this past year. Doesn't mean they're unbeatable. But look, this is, exactly the kind of biography you'd like to have. It'd be great sympathy because of Gabby Giffords. And as you noted, the McSally, fell short against a Democratic nominee that we thought was, seriously flawed. Now, it was a good year for Democrats in a lot of places. But, boy, that's instantly looking like a very tough race for Republicans in 2020.
Yeah, and how much pressure do you think the party's putting on the congressman you mentioned not to get in, so that way Kelly doesn't have to, go left to make sure he wins the primary, but can just waltz into the general election as Mr. Bipartisan, as you put it?
God, that guy's going to wake up with Tang in his bed tomorrow morning. You don't mess with the space mafia.
All right, let's go on to our crazy martini now, Jim. And yesterday we talked about Ilhan Omar and her. It's all about the Benjamins, baby, about why Republicans and quite a few Democrats support the nation of Israel. Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership issuing a sternly worded letter and ordering Ilhan Omar to apologize. I suppose some credit is due to the Democratic leadership for going public in their condemnation of that. So Ilhan Omar does, in fact, unequivocally apologize for the first paragraph of her apology and then once again takes a swipe at AIPAC in the second paragraph of her apology. And so, Jim, this led to your cheap apologies section in the Morning Jolt today. Not only her, but Ralph Northam's meandering, contradictory apology that is stretched out over a week now. So what's worse, not apologizing when one is clearly due, or an insincere one that everyone knows is insincere?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're leading towards, certainly in the case. Because seriously, it was just about 3 weeks ago she apologized for, I didn't realize that claiming Israel hypnotizes the world could sound anti-Semitic and sound like I was suggesting that they have sinister manipulation behind the scenes and mind control and all those anti-Semitic conspiracies. I had no idea. There's a famous scene from Seinfeld where George gets in trouble for carrying on an affair with the cleaning lady at his office, and he says, if anyone had told me that sort of thing was frowned upon when I started here, I never would have known. Deeply frustrating, because if you're the congresswoman, you don't keep making the same mistake over and over again. Of course, she's tweeted about Israel being an apartheid state. Look, we get it. She hates Israel. You and I talked about this yesterday. It's not like Israel's beyond criticism. When you start, first of all, as we mentioned yesterday, she was just so flat out wrong on the facts of arguing, it's donations from AIPAC. AIPAC doesn't make donations. We all know it's just a matter of time before she does this sort of thing again. I would argue that anti-Semitism, which she will insist is merely anti-Zionism, it's part of her brand identity now. This is who she is. They very much, because once you say it's all about the Benjamins, baby, that's not subtle. That's not. I worded this incorrectly or something like that. She adamantly believes that the reason America has fairly pro-Israel policies is because of Jewish money. And it's sinister and it's terrible, as I believe it was, Shoshana Weinstein had said earlier this a couple of days ago, that groups you dislike, quote, buy influence, Greg. But when it's a group you like, they change policy. That's the only difference there. And it's just this... the disingenuous is there, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating the drum endlessly on Ralph Northam, but each new day, there's some new wrinkle that makes this worse. I think what's driving me crazy today is that we heard about him reading Roots from an earlier report in the Washington Post, Greg, and now we're hearing that Ralph Northam plans to watch The Birth of a Nation because he was not aware that it was a racist film. No, the thing is, it's all about the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. That would be your first clue, that this is not a, Kumbaya film or something like that. I could understand somebody not having seen Birth of a Nation for obvious reasons. You don't see it screened very often. It's very controversial and all that stuff. For those who are not familiar, if there are listeners out there, came out in 1915 as a work of cinematic. It's a silent film. It has no audio. But in terms of the cinematography, in terms of the use of the medium of film as storytelling, it was very groundbreaking. So it's one of those things where you have this very, a bit like the work of Leni Riefenstahl. In terms of the technical achievement, it's really groundbreaking and new and marks a turning point. But it's done in the cause of evil. It's done for a really terrible intention and has a terrible message. But there's no two ways around it. Birth of a Nation fanned the flames of racism, and people argue that it really restarted what had been a slowly dying Klan back then. Also worth noting, screened by Woodrow Wilson. back then.
Yes.
So
who loved it.
I just feel like Joe Goldberg owes me a quarter every time I repeat some sort of unflattering historical fact about Woodrow Wilson, probably the most overrated president in American history.
Well, and he loved it, we should point out. He was
that's the other thing.
raging racist.
It was like gives it, the Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs down.
Yeah, any chance to ding Woodrow Wilson is more than appropriate, no matter what the context. Jim, fascinating day today as always. We'll do it again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.